Hey y'all, my name is Megan Green, aka Mercurial Megan, and I'm an astrologer and tarot reader based out of Gainesville, Florida. I am also a huge fan of music and popular culture, and there is certainly nothing bigger right now than Kendrick Lamar's Pop Out show that happened last night in LA. I did a video a couple of weeks ago about Kendrick Lamar's natal chart, Drake's natal chart. I compared the two together with synastry. And then I also did a little tarot pull at the end, which I thought was really interesting. The last card that I pulled for Kendrick was the Five of Swords. And I remember saying that this card sort of represents a potential for people to see Kendrick maybe overdoing it or maybe bullying Drake. Now, the swords in tarot represent air signs, which Kendrick is an air sign. He is a Gemini, but they also lean towards things more concerned with like intellect and communication and conversation and words and thoughts, all of these sort of air-like qualities and themes. And I would definitely say that, rap music or, the expression of thoughts through rap music could certainly be tied to the swords in tarot. At the pop out, Kendrick performed Not Like Us 5 times. Now they played the song, I think 6 times. The sixth time, it was just as Kendrick was walking out. So I think a lot of people are not counting the sixth time. But what you see on the internet is that the song was performed 5 times. Now let's think about that last card, right? The Five of Swords. I don't think that's coincidental. And even though I think the majority of the public is enjoying it and really found a lot of entertainment in that song being played 5 times, I have definitely seen people make the comment that it could have been like overkill. And now this is kind of going into bullying territory. So it's interesting how that card has kind of played out over time, and we'll continue to see kind of how that energy manifests as this, continues to unfold. But what I thought would be interesting to do today is to look at solar return charts. Now, natal charts are something that stand the test of time. We will always be sort of tied to our natal chart, and our natal chart really sets the baseline for everything else that we are able to do in astrology. And it's just sort of like the lifelong themes that a person may experience. But we do get more specific increments of time based on other supplemental charts like progressions and solar returns, which sort of give you a year-long view of the themes that you might experience for a year. And then we have even smaller increments of time like lunar returns, where we're looking at a month-to-month type of timeline. So it's all very interesting. And I thought it would be really cool to take a look at the solar return, especially for Kendrick, because he just had his birthday, and we can really sort of use his chart to sort of anticipate what the year ahead might be for him. So let me go ahead and just start pulling that up. So this is Kendrick's chart. Let me get that all set up. Okay, so this is Kendrick's natal chart. We took a look at this last time that I did this. What is important to note in these charts is the placement of the sun, because it's solar. So these are solar returns. In a solar return chart, we are looking for the sun to be in the exact position that it was on the day that we were born. So if you see here, Kendrick's sun is at 26 degrees 10. And if we go ahead and pull up the solar return chart, we see that the sun is again at 26 degrees Gemini 10. So this is the moment in 2024 that sort of snapshots the energy that Kendrick is going to carry throughout the year. There are lots of things that are super interesting about this chart for me. In this solar return chart, Kendrick is a Gemini sun, which he always is. The moon is in Libra. His natal moon is in Pisces, but the ascendant is also in Libra, and his natal ascendant is in Libra. So when the angles are the same, this feels like a full circle moment for me, or something that's going to kind of like bring back that natal promise or that natal storyline, right? So Kendrick's sun, because that moon or because that rising sign is Libra, means that his sun is going to still be in the ninth house like it is in his natal chart. In this case, we have Jupiter there at 5 degrees, the sun at 26, Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, at 28, and Venus at 29 degrees of Gemini, all in the ninth house. Now, the ninth house is an interesting house. It is about higher education, philosophy, spirituality. The ninth house also has ties to father figures. It's also about broadcasting to some extent, right? Like the third house is about communication and sort of like, one-to-one communication, but the ninth house is more like professing. So I think it's interesting that natally, Kendrick has these ties to the ninth house. And I definitely feel like his Gemini themes of communication and speak and connection really come through that ninth house element, but it's even being echoed throughout this solar return chart. So he's really sort of amplifying his voice and broadcasting it, amplifying his philosophies and broadcasting it. Now, what we have here that's a bit different than his natal chart is that Jupiter is involved. So Jupiter is the planet of blessings and expansion. So when we see Jupiter in this part of his sky, that also sort of echoes what his natal chart has, it's amplifying his voice. I think it's easy to say that this is the biggest platform that Kendrick has ever had in his career and in his lifetime, right? Like he's being heard on a very massive scale. So I love to see that in the chart, and it really just sort of continues the theme that he is going to be really on a speaker box for the next year, really sort of able to use his voice and to express himself in whatever ways he sees fit, and for that to sort of be broadcasted out on a massive, large scale level. When we think about the masses, or like, mass audiences, we think about the 11th house. And here in this chart, his 11th house is in Leo. Leo is the performer. Leo is the artist. Leo is like the creator, and it's ruled by the sun. And the sun, again, is in Gemini in that ninth house space. So it's really tying those two together. So he has a huge platform right now, and he's going to continue to have a huge platform for the rest of the year. Something else that I think is really interesting is that he has Pluto in Aquarius in the 5th house of creativity, love, romance, play, and also competition. Pluto is a planet that represents power dynamics, power struggles, but it's also about death and rebirth and transformation. When I see Pluto in the 5th house, and when I tie it into the trine that it's making to all of these planets in Gemini, even though it's not an exact trine, it's a sign-based trine, because they're all air signs involved here. Pluto is activating creativity on a massive level for Kendrick. And I'm thinking about it obviously through him and his own personal artistry, right? Like he's come out with back-to-back tracks. People are talking about his creative projects more than they ever have, probably. And maybe that they ever will. I don't know. I think Kendrick probably is one of those artists that will be speaking about, for as long as he wants to create art. But I think this is probably the pinnacle of his career and his creative output. But I'm also thinking about all of the other creations that this has birthed. And I say birthed because the 5th house is also about children and love and, creativity and creating a child or just creating anything. And we have seen an uptick in content creation since this has happened. I mean, I was not creating videos anymore. I had kind of fallen off. And then this, beef sort of reignited the desire within me to create content. So I'm thinking about it even on a personal level, but I know that there have been lots of content creators and lots of things that have sort of been birthed from Kendrick's inspiration or, what he's been able to put out into the world. So Pluto down here in the 5th house does tell me that there's more to be sort of created. There's more to be born here from what Kendrick has done or put out. And it is retrograde. So there is some sort of like reflection or something a little bit more internalized that's happening here also. So I do think that with Pluto here in his 5th house, this is going to be like a creative renaissance for Kendrick, and he will be sort of putting himself out there a little bit more and probably in a much more powerful way. I'm also seeing that he has Saturn here in the 6th house right now with a 29-degree Neptune in the sign of Pisces. So Saturn is the planet of discipline, restriction, hard work, effort, and it's also about karma. Like whatever you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. And the 6th house is about work, health, routines, and habits. In the sign of Pisces, it's very artistic, highly intuitive, and also speaks to like the collective in terms of like a collective spirituality, collective consciousness, things like that. The 11th house is definitely more about like the masses and the collectives in terms of like networks, and not the 11th house. I mean, the 11th house, but also the sign of Aquarius, where we have Pisces being a little bit more about the collective consciousness. And so with Saturn and Neptune there, I do see this as like a dedicated or a committed sense of work, creative work, artistic work. With Saturn here, I definitely see that he's going to be working hard. I would not be surprised if he has another project or another coming out that he's really putting a lot of time and effort into. I think that's going to continue to be the case. With Neptune there, there's also this like creative burst and creative inspiration that's happening there also. I wonder too, with Saturn there, if there are going to be some sort of setbacks in terms of like what he's able to put out, or if there are going to be like people trying to halt or stop his projects. If that is the case, I think he'll be able to prevail over it, but it's something that I kind of want to just keep in mind with how Saturn can sort of influence things being halted or stopped. It makes me wonder if there's going to be some sort of like a pushback from higher ups in media that might be able to stop things on his behalf, or, you know, stop things that he wants to put out from actually coming out. We also see that there is an opposition from Saturn here to Juno and Virgo in the 12th house. Now, honestly, this was one of the most interesting things that I found in this solar return chart. And it might be one of the things that we're not really talking about because it's a lesser element to the overall beef, right? Juno is an asteroid that represents equal partnership, ideal partnership, and equality within partnership. And Virgo is the sign of service, but it's also affiliated with the Virgin. And when we say Virgin, we really are just thinking about like feminine archetypes, like this sort of holy feminine archetype. And we have it here in the 12th house, which is private. It's isolated. It's about retreat. It's about being behind the scenes, but it's also about the subconscious, right? And it's also like the spiritual space. So when I see Juno here in the 12th house, I immediately think of Kendrick's wife and the role that she must be playing in his life right now. Now, she's not a public figure. She's not somebody who's out and about, you know, publicly that we really see or hear from. And when I see Juno here in the 12th house, I think that that's going to continue to be true. I think she is definitely behind the scenes playing a role of service that he is benefiting from. This Juno, if we want to click it, is also opposite the Saturn in the 6th house. So I'm wondering if this year, if there's going to be this tug of war between the work he feels like he needs to do and the ways that he needs to show up for his partner. Now, the other aspects that is being made from this Juno is a trine to Ceres. That's this guy down here. Let me go back to this. So Ceres is another sort of asteroid planetary body that represents the ways that we are nurtured, but also the sacrifices that we have to make. So Kendrick this year has a 4th house in Capricorn, which is all about tradition. It's also about achievement and ambition, but it's an earth sign. And so it's solid and it's really about sort of growing something for the long term, like leaving a legacy. So when I see Ceres down here, I recognize that he's nurturing that legacy, right? Like there's something that he's really trying to build and cultivate here, but there's also probably a lot of sacrifices that are being made, and the sacrifices are probably being made from his family or from the people in his private life in order to support what's happening publicly, but it's directly connected to his partner as well. So while I feel like there might be some tension between the work that he's doing or the adversaries that he is, involved with in that sixth house space that might be affecting his wife or his partner in that Juno position. That trine to Ceres also lets me know that like she's willing to nurture and sacrifice. She's willing, even if it comes, to her detriment or, to her unhappiness potentially, she is willing to sacrifice. She is willing to Virgo serve in order to create that firm foundation for him to sort of root off of. So I kind of love that position, but I also just want to make sure that she is taking care of herself and not losing herself in a sort of self-sacrificial way that can often be found in that Pisces Virgo axis, right? Like I think about that axis a lot as like the savior martyr axis. It has a lot to do with service and compassion, but as with everything, we cannot just serve, without our needs also being met. So that's just an interesting part of this solar return chart that I thought might be something that's kind of overlooked. Now, his ascendant is in the sign of Libra, and Libra, as we know, is all about partnership. It's all about fairness. It's all about justice, which I think a big part of this beef is about. Like Kendrick feels like he wants to right these wrongs, or he wants justice to be served, or he wants these, wrong things to be sort of called out. And we see that with the ascendant being in Libra. And Libra, again, is a sign that's ruled by Venus, and Venus is at that 29 degrees in Gemini, paired with the Sun and Mercury and Jupiter in that sign. So all of that energy is kind of going back to that ninth house space of broadcasting and philosophizing and just sort of putting your ideas out there to the world. His moon being there does sort of reflect that his emotional state is going to be paired with the others in his life. And when I see the South Node there also, it does sort of speak to some sort of release that's happening there for him. So I think this is sort of a release of an identity. I think the Kendrick that we knew before is not the Kendrick that we're going to know moving forward. So something is happening there in terms of release. But I also think a lot of his emotions this year are going to be based on how other people are feeling or how other people are impacting him, which kind of takes me back to that Virgo, Juno stuff going on there, and just wondering like what's going on in the partnership. Are things fair and balanced there? How is that being reflected? A lot of Libra is reflection, right? It's mirrors. We're mirroring each other through these experiences. And sitting opposite that first house is the seventh house of Aries, which is a warrior sort of fighting spirit sign. And we have the descendant there, the North Node, and Chiron. So Chiron is a planetary body, asteroid, whatever you want to call it, that represents the wounded healer. So there's some sort of wounding that's happening with him in, connection with other people, because the seventh house are these one-on-one relationships that we have. So we know that there's conflict with other people, right? Like we've seen it unfold, and I think we're going to kind of continue to see it unfold. But the North Node there tells me that there is something tied to fate or towards the direction that he's supposed to be heading that's involved with these relationships. Last night at the pop out, we saw Kendrick really bringing different groups and gangs and affiliations together through his artistry. Another thing that Libra is affiliated with, because it's connected to the sign of Venus, is art and beauty and, all of these sort of artistic pleasures and expressions that we get to experience. So through Kendrick's releasing of art, South Node in Libra, we are seeing new bonds and relationships be created and healed, North Node Chiron in Aries, right? Through his initiative. That's another Aries word, is like initiating, kind of choosing to stand out from the crowd, choosing to take the risk or the leap to, call someone out in order to bring other people together. So I do kind of see this North Node Chiron as a healing of relational wounds, but I also can kind of see it on the other end as it's sort of like antagonizing relational wounds. So I think that there might be some continued conflict that Kendrick experiences this year with other people. And it might not be something that we see on a public scale. It might be something that happens privately. It might be, in connection to his partner. It might be in connection to people behind the scenes. But I do feel like there is some sort of wounding or some conflict that's happening there that's based on his independence or his rogue sort of energy, like putting himself out there. So I think that that is super interesting too. The last thing that I kind of wanted to wrap up with this solar return chart is that Kendrick has his 8th house in Taurus, which is a resource sign that's also ruled by the planet Venus, which is again at that 29 degrees of Gemini right now in that 9th house space. So tying those two houses together again. So when I see that in the 8th house of other people's resources, intimacy, merging, power, things like that, and then I look at the planets that are involved in that 8th house, we've got Mars, which is the planet of action and aggression, and we've got Uranus, which is the planet of sudden shakeups and surprises. I think that Kendrick will have many collaborating opportunities this year if he chooses to accept them. I think there's a big, potential for him to have windfalls or financial windfalls or a lot of earning and growth that happens through this 8th house space also. But with Mars there, Mars does not love to be in the sign of Taurus. Mars likes to take action and move forward, and Taurus is kind of a slow-paced sign that's not really trying to move or do a lot of activity per se. So I think with that combination, there could be some conflict around these joint projects or these joint ventures or around money in some way. With Uranus there also, there could be the combination of those two does kind of speak to a little bit of volatility in some ways. So I think while he is having this like victory lap right now, I think there will potentially be some consequences that come to him based on that Chiron North Node in Aries and this Mars Uranus in Taurus. Like something's going on there that I can't quite put my finger on yet, but I'm sure in time it will be sort of revealed what's going on there. So overall, I think this is a pretty awesome year for Kendrick, where we're going to see him really broadcasting his talents and his skills and who he is as a person on a much larger level. But I don't think it's going to be without consequence, whether it's in business relationships or in his private connections with his partner as well. So that is just a quick little thought on Kendrick's solar return. And since we've got to do his adversary, we're going to pull up Drake's solar return chart also. So Kendrick's birthday was, I believe, June 17th. So we just passed it. So his solar return just started, and we're going to see a whole year from now until the next June 16th, 17th, 18th timeframe when the sun goes back to that position. Drake was born in October, so we're already halfway through his solar return. This is his solar return chart. He is also in a solar return where his angles are lined up in the same way that they were when he was born. Drake natally is a Leo rising, and in the solar return chart, he is also a Leo rising. So again, this is also a full circle sort of, come to Jesus moment for him this year. We also see that Drake has a ton of planets in Scorpio in the 4th house. He natally also has a ton of planets in Scorpio in the 4th house. But this year we see the Sun, Mercury, Mars, the IC, and Ceres in that 4th house of Scorpio. This makes me feel like home life, family, ancestry, the past, all of that is going to be a major theme this year. And in the sign of Scorpio, it's going to be about like excavation, like pulling all of this stuff up to the surface. Psychological stuff also, really dealing with the depths of an issue, and with his son being involved, the depths of who he is, what his personality is, what he stands for, all of these things. The 4th house is a private house, and Scorpio is a private sign. So I think this year might be a year where we see Drake being a bit more reclusive than he normally is, or he should be, right? Like we can always choose to do the opposite of what our chart is asking us to do. But it just sort of speaks to like, okay, maybe this is a year where you need to focus a little bit more on your internal life, on your home life, on your family, on your psychology. This would be a great year for Drake to get some therapy, especially when we see, again, Ceres down there. So there's some sort of nurturing that wants to happen through this process also, but it's like, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to have that be fulfilled? We're also seeing that the South Node is in Libra in this chart at 24 degrees in his third house of communication and local communities. So there is a release for him happening in the sort of like circles that he frequents. That's not going to be the same as it was before. And even in terms of like, things he may release in terms of projects or the way that he communicates to the world, there's some sort of emptiness or release that's happening there. So maybe like the projects aren't hitting the same. People aren't hearing him in the ways that he wants to be heard. There's just a release that's happening there. And in the sign of Libra, again, Libra being about partnerships, like we're releasing the partnerships that we used to collaborate with, right? And I think we've seen through this beef that a lot of his previous collaborators are not really fucking with him like that anymore. So with that South Node being in the third, that means the North Node is in the ninth house, and it's also there with Chiron in Aries. So the North Node in the ninth does speak to like long distance travel, higher education, and healing. Any sort of these like spiritual or philosophical wounds that he may be dealing with on a personal level, because it's in the sign of Aries, and Aries is all about the self. So when I see this, I'm thinking he needs to travel. Go away, go on vacation, isolate, take this time to really reflect and heal and acknowledge your wounding and really, do what you can to take initiative to address those wounds. Just like in Kendrick's chart with all of his ninth house placements in that solar return chart, it's about father figures and standing up in a role of being a father figure in some way. So when I see this for Drake in the ninth house, I'm thinking like, are we healing those paternal wounds? Are we healing the ways that we show up as a father? Are we feeling kind of called out or triggered because Chiron's there? Like, how are you going to use that to your benefit, right? Like we can use any of these placements on the high end or on the low end. The low end would be feeling triggered by that, wanting to broadcast yourself, your pain, even make you stand out even more and be like, I'm this rogue character. Nobody understands me. That would be kind of Chiron and Aries in the ninth house a bit. But on the high end, it could be like, I'm healing these paternal wounds. I'm taking the initiative to do this healing, to do this self-reflection, and to really go at it. So the North Node there is asking him to have these like higher spiritual, philosophical thoughts about who he is as an individual and what he can do to initiate that healing. We also see that he has Pluto in Capricorn at 27 degrees. So his birthday back in October was back when Pluto was still in Capricorn. And we know that Pluto is currently retrograde in Aquarius, and it's going to dip back into this area of the chart in September, from September to November. So there's going to be like a reigniting of this energy at some point. So the sixth house, again, is that work, habits, routines, coworkers, subordinates, things like that. Pluto is that power play, that influence, that death, rebirth, and transformation. So I think that with Pluto here, there's going to be a rebirth of his work, of what he puts out there, of the people that he, again, collaborates with, who he would consider co-workers. And just trying to change that up. With him being so Scorpio heavy in both his natal chart and in this solar return chart, Scorpios reinvent themselves over and over and over again. And just when you think they're dead, they come back to life. They're that Phoenix rising. So I would not be surprised if at some point, and maybe it's going to be during that, retrograde time when Pluto is back in Capricorn this year, between September and November, he may have another resurrection. There may be a rebirth. Drake may come out with a piece of work that really sort of shuts people up or creates like a shock wave or, a powerful influence that people are going to have to, recognize and not just, write off. In this chart, Drake has a 7th house moon in Aquarius. Aquarius is about being progressive. It's very intellectual. It's very logical. It is also kind of like mad scientist energy. And it's also, again, about like large groups of people, networks, the masses. When I see a moon in that sign, it does make me feel like he is emotionally tied to the masses, to what the people are saying. And when you pair it with the 7th house, that makes it even more true. It's similar to having a Libra moon, right? Like both of these guys this year care about what other people are saying, period. Like neither one of them is above the opinions of others and it impacting them emotionally. So I've seen a lot of jokes about, like, oh, after this show, Drake must be like hiding in a closet somewhere. Oh, he hates the way all these people are talking about this. Blah, 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 blah. Both of these dudes care about what people are saying this year, period. Drake is being more emotionally affected by the masses, where Kendrick is being a little bit more emotionally affected about like one-on-one dynamics, but they're both very much caring about what we all are saying. So that is certainly reflective in this chart. And this moon makes a sign-based square to all of these planets in Scorpio, but it's actually making a degree trine to his sun and his Mercury in Scorpio and that south node in Libra. So there is some sort of, again, like emotional support. There's a free-flowing energy that's happening there, but there's also a little bit of tension, right? Because there's still that sign-based square between Scorpio and Aquarius. So again, this just is another thing that makes me feel like all of this hate and all of this like external chatter about him may be precisely the thing that causes his resurrection, right? Like it may be the fuel that he needs to sort of like create and to come back as something brand new. We also have Saturn showing up in Drake's 8th house of other people's money, joint business ventures, intimacy merging, and he also has Neptune there at 25 degrees retrograde. Saturn is also retrograde at 0 degrees in Pisces. So again, Pisces is that sort of like artistic expression. But when I see it in the 8th house and when I see Saturn involved, even with Neptune, I'm thinking the money is getting funny. Saturn, again, is those like restrictions and those blockages. So I'm wondering if his money is being blocked in some way, like, maybe the brands that he collaborated with before, not really trying to collaborate with him right now, or there's some sort of halt to the money, transactions that he was anticipating or used to having, and he's kind of having to, regroup in some way, reflect. Now, Saturn, again, is also that planet of karma. The 8th house is about intimacy and merging. Pisces is about like kind of blurred lines and boundaries. And I'm thinking that this might have a little bit to do with some of the accusations around, sex trafficking and, younger women and things like that. So there could be an element of this where it's like karma is kind of coming to collect in terms of some of those things and in ways that there might have been abuses of power and things like that. It's kind of taking me back to that 9th house Chiron and the North Node. And even though we talked about it in terms of like philosophy and travel, it's also legal matters. So at some point with Chiron being there, there may be some sort of legal matter that gets brought up that sort of pokes at him a little bit. That's kind of triggering a wound in some way for him. I'm also now looking at his 10th house of Taurus, which we've talked about in Kendrick's solar return chart as well. But in this version of Drake's solar return, he has Jupiter at 11 degrees. It is retrograde and it's connecting to his MC at 9 degrees. And we also have Uranus here at 21 degrees, also retrograde. Retrogrades can sometimes be like redoing or reviewing or undoing in some ways. And so Jupiter normally in the 10th house would be like blessings in a career perspective. When I'm seeing it retrograde and opposite so much of that energy in Scorpio. I feel like it is the undoing of everything that he built and sort of fortified. Again, Taurus is that solid earth sign. And we thought we built something really strong, and now we're having to undo that. And that Jupiter might be sort of stripping away some of those things, but also it could be amplifying the distaste, amplifying the negative attention, amplifying all of the things that he wanted to keep private in that fourth house space. Now it's coming to roost in a very public way. Your Uranus there is, again, sudden shakeups and surprises. I'm sure he was not expecting this, right? Like, I'm sure he was not expecting so much negative attention. I'm sure he was not expecting it to get as deep and as personal as it got. But again, that's all of that stuff happening in opposition to that fourth house of Scorpio. The last thing that I want to touch on in terms of this solar return chart is his second house of Virgo, where he has Black Moon Lilith, Juno, and Venus in the sign of Virgo. So the second house is your income. It's the money that you make, but it's also your values, your morals, your self-esteem, your feelings of self-worth. The ruler of his 10th house, which we just spoke about, is Venus, and Venus is down here in the second house. Virgo, on the low end, is a very critical sign. So if we think about the ruler of the 10th and all of the reversals that might be happening there, and we think about the ruler of that house being in a sign that is associated with criticism, we see how this could have been a very sensitive time for him in terms of public criticism. And when we tie in the fact that Venus represents the feminine and women, it clearly makes the connection between some of the allegations around how Drake views women or treats women as well. Venus is considered in its detriment or fallen or not strong in the sign of Virgo. And that is because Venus just wants to love and live freely and enjoy all of the pleasures, and Virgo wants to kind of pick everything apart, right? So Venus is not in a strong position here, even though it does have triplicity because it is an earth sign. So there is some dignity, there is some support there, but it's not super strong. And so that really does speak to like how Drake values women, how his self-esteem may be tied up in the women that he has around him. And just like his value systems might be undergoing criticism from the external, because again, we're talking about the 10th house tie, but then also internally, how he's feeling about himself. A lot of criticism could be kind of brewing within him right now. What I find really interesting is that Black Moon Lilith, which is about like desire and the forbidden, is at 2 degrees right on top of Juno, which again is that ideal partnership, which I don't think he has. So there's a desire for it. And I almost think that there might be, sometimes when I see Virgo Venus, it's like the Madonna whore complex. And I wonder if that's a little bit of what is going on with Drake. There might be like an idealized version of women that he kind of has in his mind, that he's struggling with internally on some level. And he might be questioning his values around partnership, women, and how that all impacts him personally and how he feels about himself because of that. So super interesting stuff going on here. Just to kind of take a peek, since we are looking at Kendrick's 2004, I'd like to kind of see what 2024, 2025 might look like for Drake. So let's fast forward 1 year. Okay. Ooh, this is the first time that I'm seeing this birthday chart for him. So you're seeing my first initial reactions. So in this chart, he's Libra rising. And he's got that Juno on the ascendant, and he's got the South Node in that first house of needing to release an identity. And now he's got that North Node in Chiron in the 7th house of relationships and other people and wounding and conflict. So I think we're going to be having another sort of bout of those themes within the next year for him. His Sun and Mercury are now in that second house of values and self-esteem and self-worth and income. So there might be a rebirth around the money that he's making. There might also be a rebirth around his self-esteem and the ways that he feels about himself. We also see that Pluto is going to be at 29 degrees of Capricorn in that fourth house of home and family. So something is transforming within his home and family life for sure. We also see that Saturn in the sixth house of work in the sign of Pisces. So I think, again, he's going to be kind of going back into the lab and figuring out, like, how can I readdress the ways that I'm working, who I'm collaborating with, things like that, again, artistically, because it's happening in the sign of Pisces. Saturn, these are very similar themes to what we saw with Kendrick. Drake in 2024, 2025, may be having some hardships connecting with people within the work environment, or perhaps there's some sort of setback. I'm also thinking about ops, because a big part of this beef was that Drake had a mole within his group. And so when I'm seeing the Saturn there, I'm wondering if that becomes a larger narrative within the next year for him. We'll kind of have to watch that and see. But yeah, that's super interesting. Also, what I think is the most interesting in this chart is that he is going to have Moon, Mars in the 10th house of Cancer. Super emotional sign, emotionally expressive, tapped into emotions, dealing with the mother. Mars, not super happy in the sign of Cancer, super emotionally reactive, gonna cut you off, gonna, do what it needs to do to protect itself, and tied to the moon to protect its emotions. I wonder if this creates, it could be a couple of different things. We could see Drake being extremely emotionally reactive in a very public way, because it's at the 10th house at the top of the chart. We could also see him really create music that is very emotionally expressive. I'm thinking very angry, but it also could just be like, I could also see this being a little bit more like R&B, like him really leaning into that. I could also see this in terms of like mother figures, maybe something with his mom being attacked or him needing to defend her. I could also see this in terms of like babies' mothers maybe coming out, maybe seeing them a bit more publicly, or him having to address that, or there being some sort of public conflict. Oh, I don't think the public conflict piece of this is over for Drake after this year. I think it continues into 2024, 2025. But that will be super interesting to watch unfold. Ooh. Okay, so that is all I want to say in terms of the solar return charts. Now that we've looked at them together, we can kind of watch how the next year unfolds for both of these men and see, what comes of it and if it is accurate to what the solar return spoke of. But I think it's interesting that we see Kendrick with a Libra rising this year, and then we see Drake with that same Libra rising next year. And I wonder how much of what happens for Drake in 2024, 2025 is influenced or replicated or mirrored by what Kendrick does this year. A lot of times with Libra too, it's like your response to what someone is doing or saying or thinking. And I wonder if there's just a lot of like reactionary moves made by Drake based on the reflection of what's going on with Kendrick, or how that is influencing him in some way. So now, as we did the last time, I would like to go ahead and pull some cards for these dudes. The first card will be Kendrick. The third card will be Drake. The card in between will be the vibe between them. And let's just see if we get anything more than what we did the last time, and now that things have developed a little bit more. What's going on with these dudes? Let me make sure I get them shuffled up really well. Yeah, it's very interesting when I'm thinking about these two and their solar return charts. So much of Kendrick's solar return was at the top, public, legacy, attention. So much of Drake's was at the bottom, hiding, secrecy, privacy, introspection. So even if you don't know a lot about astrology, you can learn so much and just sort of glean a lot just from what hemisphere planets are in a chart. Okay, for Kendrick, for Drake, in between. Okay, interesting. So the keywords for the Empress, which is the card that represents Kendrick, is creation, development, abundance, and fertility. The card that represents Drake is the Hermit, and it represents wisdom, inner strength, prudence, solitude, loneliness, isolation, lost your way. The card in between them is the Six of Cups, nostalgia, reunions, innocence, memories, unrealistic expectations, focused on the past, very nostalgic energy. So the way that I interpret this myself, the very first thing that I thought of when I pulled this Empress card again was Kendrick's wife. What is she feeling? What is she doing? What is she thinking about all of this? And I imagine she is also holding it down. It's reminding me of that Ceres energy, very nurturing, very caring. But it's interesting that he would have the Empress pulled for him after what I notated in terms of partnership in his solar return chart. Now, if we don't want to think about that, we can think about it in terms of creativity for him, him just having a big creative abundance, really being able to put things out there and really being respected for his creativity and his work. And again, there's a nurturing energy with the Empress. So Kendrick right now is kind of in big nurturer mode publicly, like, you know, there's a lot of up and coming artists underneath him. There are a lot of people that he's sort of put on, even at the pop out. There are a lot of artists that he really spotlit and nurtured. So I kind of love that energy for him with the Empress. The Hermit is interesting for Drake. Again, we talked about that fourth house and all of that Scorpio energy, isolation with the Hermit, going within, taking some time for introspection, getting out of the spotlight and just sort of going, you know, to a private place to really reflect on, like, how did I get here? Why do people feel this way about me? Is this who I am? A lot of that is going to be going on with this Hermit card. And again, it's kind of like the dark night of the soul. Like the Hermit's got this star in a lamp and it's kind of lighting the way through the darkness. So I think that there's a real potential for Drake to kind of like, you know, have this moment of self-reflection and to come back really vulnerable and really honest and just, you know, maybe that is that moon, Mars and Cancer in the 10th house in his next solar return chart, where he's really just like putting his emotions out there and being really honest and very frank. Again, in the sign of Cancer, that's big Empress energy too. Like maybe Kendrick is influencing this and then able to kind of like, you know, feed that back into Drake and his creativity. Now, the card in between them is the Six of Cups. And the Six of Cups, to me, is a big children card. So the kids are a big part of this. And especially with the Empress involved, parent, you know, motherhood, parenting, the kids. This is a huge theme that has kind of been between both of them and has been a part of the call out, right? Like, you're not a good father, or this is how I father, let me father you. You know, there's a lot of that going on here. And so I wonder, well, the first thing that I thought with this light going towards these children, and there's two, a boy and a girl, is another child going to be revealed? Do we get a spotlight on another child? Does what's hidden come out? That's one interpretation. Another interpretation could just be like, these are things that are impacting the children involved, and we have to kind of think about how that's affecting them. It's also about the past. Will these two be able to bury the past, or is this something that's going to exist between them forever? Are they going to be stuck in this, you know, loop of whatever has happened with them in the past? I don't know. I think it's also interesting that both of these cards are major arcana, and this is the minor arcana in between them. So that is something to just kind of watch. reunions was one of those keywords, but I doubt that we will get a reunion between these two men just based on how intensely Kendrick has, come at him. But that is also something to kind of keep in mind as a potential. Maybe Drake wants to sort of heal the past and wants to kind of throw the white flag and potentially have this, reconciliation. I don't know. We will have to see how that unfolds, but I think that's an interesting card to have between them. Let's see what else we get here. I'm also thinking about this Six of Cups in terms of like for Drake, in terms of nostalgia of like the career I used to have, who I was before all of this. That might be a part of this too. Okay, so the next set of cards, we have the Ace of Swords, mental clarity, new ideas, new victory. For Drake, we have the Four of Pentacles, financial stability, possessiveness, retirement, materialism, hoarding, controlling. And then in between them, we have the Four of Cups, deep thought, soul searching, apathy, delusion, avoidance, lack of caring, missed opportunities. Kendrick seems to definitely be in the strength position here. Again, we talked about swords earlier in terms of like communication and ideas and projects. I think he's got a new project coming out that's going to be pretty serious. I think it's going to be super strong. It's going to come in really sharp and it's going to be kind of aggressive. And it feels really pointed and it feels really direct. I don't think it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Drake, though I'm sure there will be some subliminals or some, messaging there. But I feel like for him, it's a strong, creative project, and it is something extremely intellectual that is going to get people thinking and talking. And again, in terms of the Empress and creativity, that links those two very nicely together. And if you see, there's like a crown around this swords card. So he's definitely the king of hip hop right now. And he's the one who's sort of like coming down with the sword to determine like what is and what isn't hip hop. And, is this valid or not? He's kind of like the voice representing the culture at this point. Four of Pentacles for Drake. He is holding on for dear life to the things that he has. Very protective, very stingy, very locked down, very kind of like scarcity mindset. Feels fearful to me. He's really just trying to cling to what he has and to kind of protect what he's built. Again, we see kind of like a king-ish figure because it's got a crown going on, but this figure is he's not in the castle. He's outside of the castle. So there's something going on there where, we've got to maybe reclaim what we had, or we're wanting to reclaim what we had, but we're not quite there yet. So he's really holding on to what he's got in a very kind of like fearful or scarcity mindset type way. And in between them is the Four of Cups. And that is a card for me that really does represent a lot of apathy. And again, I always like to look at like, where are the cards facing? Who are the images talking to, right? Here we've got the Four of Cups. The figure is looking more towards this direction. So it makes me feel like Kendrick does not care. He doesn't care. He's still going to come down hard on that sword. Cups are about feelings and emotions. He doesn't care about your emotions. He's coming with facts, intellect, strength. The back is towards this card. So if there is any sort of introspection or reflection, it's happening probably more on Drake's end and him needing to kind of go through that. But then also, it's not really facing that card. So it's making me feel like that might be something harder for him to accept or harder for him to do, but it's being required of him right now. Again, I think he's being asked to kind of pull back. And if he doesn't pull back, that would really be a shame. Don't fight the energy, go with it. If you're being ostracized, isolate. Take the time to reflect. Don't try and keep forcing yourselves down our throats. I'm looking right now also at the card at the bottom of the deck. Five of Cups, feeling lost or unloved, abandonment, regret, moving on from a situation. Cups, water signs, Scorpio, a lot of regret, a lot of disappointment, feeling very lost, feeling unloved. Three cups are tipped over. but two still stand. They're behind him. That's leaning more towards Drake's side, right? Like their redemption is here, hope is here, but you've got to be willing to accept what's been lost. Can you do that? Will you do that? Let's pull three more and we'll end it on whatever this is. Knight of Pentacles for Kendrick, hard work, responsible person, stubborn. For Drake, we've got the King of Swords, rational, intellectual, ambitious, focused mindset, abuse, manipulation, control, judgment. In between them, the Two of Pentacles, multitasking, trying to find balance, flexibility, irresponsibility, tension without future thought. Kendrick's definitely in his bag. This is a fresh financial beginning for him. That's really going to open up a lot of doors, I think. He's certainly put in the hard work. He's done what he's supposed to do. He really is kind of standing in that earth energy of being this like solid father figure type stuff going on there. Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be fine in all of this. With Drake, we see the King of Swords, and this does feel a bit like he is reclaiming his position, maybe stepping into another, feeling of empowerment. Maybe he comes back with a strong pen and really, gives us a response that is worthy of this situation, that really, speaks up. I'm thinking back to this initial Ace of Swords and that king energy that we had here coming from Kendrick. Now maybe it's inspired Drake to kind of come back with something strong and solid. But again, we've got that Two of Pentacles between them. And I think it's going to boil down to people are going to invest in either Kendrick or they're going to invest in Drake. And it's either or. And who's holding the pentacle? And which pentacle side is higher than the other side, right? Something's definitely going on there in terms of like people are going to have to make a choice. These businesses or these sponsors or these collaborators, they're going to have to choose. And I think it's leaning obviously towards Kendrick at this point. But there is hope that if Drake can come back with something strong, something verbally and intellectually strong after doing the work, it's possible. It's possible. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be something that feeds his ego. And I think that's going to be the thing that he kind of struggles with, is he's used to being in that king position, that King of Swords position, in a more empowered way, and now he's on a more defensive position. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Sometimes the King of Swords is someone who's really like verbally aggressive, verbally abusive in some way. So I wonder if there's not going to, if he comes out with a track, if it's just like crazy, if it's just like verbal annihilation or something, and that would be interesting to kind of see. But I think when I also see this card, it's just like it's time to kind of mature in the ways that you're thinking. It's time to mature in the things that you're saying and the things that you're talking about. It's time to really own your king status for good and not for self-serving purposes. So yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope looking at these solar returns were helpful. You have a solar return chart. You get a solar return chart every year on your birthday that determines what the year is going to be like for you and kind of gives you a guide of how to work with it and how to use it best towards your development. So if you are interested in learning about your solar return chart, I would love to read for you. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how this unfolds for these men. And there's a lot of money energy here too. So I'm curious as to how all of this is affecting their bags. But yeah, that's it for me. I hope you guys have a great day, and thanks for checking this page out. Bye.